My twin sister got the house our parents saved for decades to buy. I got a thank you card. My name is Avery Hale. I'm a twin. Or better yet, I'm the other twin. We were born 2 minutes apart in Madison, Wisconsin, on a freezing January morning in 1993. Same womb, same blood, same DNA. But from the very first breath, Marina was the angel and I was the afterthought. She got the nickname Sunshine. I got Avery. Just Avery. She was the miracle everyone talked about at church. I was the logistical detail, the second copy, the backup plan. What I'm about to tell you is how I went from being invisible in my own family to finally seeing myself, and how a missing signature on a piece of paper revealed something neither of us expected. But before I go on, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Like no matter what you did, someone else would always shine brighter? If that's you, hit that like button right now. Comment where you're watching from. And subscribe because this story, you're going to need to hear how it ends. It all started when I was 4 years old. Looking at old photographs, you can't tell us apart. Same dark hair, same gray eyes, same freckle on the left cheek. But if you look at the faces around us in those pictures, you'll see exactly who was loved. I remember the day I first understood I was different. Not in appearance, but in value. I was 4 years old. It was our birthday, January 14th, 1997. Mom decorated the living room with balloons, purple for Marina, yellow for me. But here's the thing. Marina got 30 purple balloons. I got 7 yellow ones. When I asked why, Mom smiled and said, "Purple is her favorite color, sweetie. We wanted to make sure she had enough." I didn't even know I was supposed to have a favorite color yet. Marina's birthday cake had 3 layers with fondant flowers and her name written in perfect cursive icing. Mine was a sheet cake from the grocery store with happy birthday printed in generic letters. Not even my name, just the words. When Dad cut the slices, Marina got the corner piece with the most frosting. I got a middle slice that fell apart on the plate. I ate it anyway. I always did. Our bedrooms told the same story. When we were 6, Mom and Dad renovated the house. Marina's room got painted soft pink with wallpaper that had little stars and moons. She got a canopy bed, a white desk, and a bookshelf shaped like a dollhouse. I watched them work on it for 2 weeks. Measuring, painting, hanging curtains that matched the bedspread. Then they got to my room. Dad asked what color I wanted. I said blue, like the sky. He nodded. 3 days later, my walls were still white, same as before. When I asked when they'd paint it, Mom said, "Oh, honey, we ran out of time. Besides, white goes with everything. You don't mind, right?" I minded. I minded so much my chest hurt, but I smiled and said, "It's fine." That's what I always said. It's fine. School was worse. Every parents' night, every recital, every art show. Marina's projects were framed and hung on the refrigerator for months. Mine went into a drawer. When we both got A's on a spelling test, the teacher called Marina a natural star. She called me very hardworking. Being smart wasn't the same as being special. I tried so hard to be noticed. I really did. I brought home perfect report cards, straight A's, every semester. Dad would glance at it and say, "Good job, kiddo." Then he'd turn to Marina and spend 20 minutes asking about her day, her friends, her dreams. I learned that my achievements were expected. Hers were celebrated. When I was 8, I started taking piano lessons. I practiced every day for an hour after school. My fingers ached. I learned for Elise in 3 months. I was so proud. I played it for my parents one evening after dinner. Mom clapped politely. Dad said, "That's nice, Avery." 2 weeks later, Marina said she wanted to try piano. She learned Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in 1 week. When she played it, missing half the notes and playing off tempo, my parents acted like she'd performed at Carnegie Hall. Mom cried. Dad recorded it on his camcorder and showed it to everyone who visited. I stopped playing piano after that. There was this one Christmas. I must have been 10. We each got to open one present on Christmas Eve. Marina opened hers first. A brand new bike, mint green with a basket and streamers on the handlebars. She squealed and hugged Mom and Dad. Then it was my turn. I opened mine slowly, hoping, praying. It was Marina's old bike, repainted, badly. You could still see the scratches and the rust on the chain. We thought you'd like it, Mom said, smiling. You're always so practical, and you take such good care of things. Practical. That word haunted me. It was code for, you don't deserve new things. Marina rode her new bike every day that summer. I rode the old one. And every time the chain slipped, I felt like I was slipping too. Out of sight. Out of mind. The worst part wasn't the bike or the cake or the room. It was the way people talked about us. At family gatherings, at church, at school events. They'd say, "Oh, Marina is such a sweetheart. So bright. So kind." Then they'd glance at me and add, "And Avery is very responsible." Responsible. Practical. Hardworking. Never special. Never the miracle. I started wondering if something was wrong with me. If maybe I was broken in some invisible way that only my parents could see. Maybe that's why they loved her more. Maybe I just wasn't worth the effort. By the time I was 12, I'd learned to be invisible. I stopped asking for things, stopped expecting praise, stopped hoping that one day someone would look at me the way they looked at her. I became the background, the stagehand, the one who made sure everything ran smoothly so Marina could shine. And she did shine. God, she shined so bright. But here's what no one tells you about being a twin. When you look identical but get treated like opposites, you start to question everything. Your worth, your existence, your right to take up space. I looked in the mirror and saw her face, but when everyone else looked at me, they saw nothing. And the worst part? I started to believe them. I thought that's just how life was. Marina was the sun. I was the shadow. Born 2 minutes later, and somehow, always 2 steps behind. But I didn't know yet that shadows only exist because there's light. And one day, I'd learn to cast my own. High school didn't fix anything. It made it worse. Marina became the golden child of Madison West High. She was on the student council, volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend, and led the environmental club. Teachers loved her. Students loved her. Our parents loved her even more. I worked 2 part-time jobs to save for college. I tutored kids in math after school. I organized Mom's photography bookings because she'd forget half of them. I was the one who reminded Dad about doctor's appointments and car maintenance. I kept the house running while Marina saved the world. But guess whose photo ended up in the local newspaper? Guess who got the Community Service Award at graduation? Not me. When we were 16, Marina borrowed my favorite sweater without asking. It was the one thing I'd saved up to buy myself. Soft gray cashmere, the first nice thing I ever owned. She wore it to a party, spilled red wine on it, and returned it ruined. When I confronted her, she cried, "I'm so sorry, Avery, I didn't mean to. Please don't be mad." And just like that, I was the villain. Mom told me I was being too harsh. Dad said accidents happen. Marina got hugs and forgiveness. I got a lecture about being more understanding. I never saw that sweater again. It wasn't just the sweater, it was everything. My clothes became hers whenever she wanted. My books, my notes, my ideas. In senior year, I wrote an essay about urban decay and renewal for English class. Got an A+. Mrs. Henderson called it insightful and mature. 2 months later, Marina used the same concept for her college application essay. She got into UW-Madison with a partial scholarship. I asked her about it once. She looked confused. "What do you mean?" I wrote about what inspired me. "We think alike, Avery. We're twins." We weren't twins. We were a sun and its shadow. College was supposed to be my escape. I applied to the architecture program at UW-Madison. I wanted to study historic preservation, to give old buildings new life, to prove that forgotten things could matter again. But when acceptance letters came, Marina got a full ride for her community leadership. I got accepted with no financial aid. Mom and Dad sat us down at the kitchen table. Dad cleared his throat. "Girls, we need to talk about college." My stomach dropped. "We can afford to send one of you," Mom said softly, fully. "The other would need to take loans or work. And we've decided." She looked at Marina with so much love. "Marina's scholarship covers tuition, but we want to help with her living expenses. Make sure she can focus on her studies and her volunteer work. It's important." What about me? My voice cracked. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. You're resourceful, Avery. You've always been good at figuring things out. You'll manage. I managed. I took out loans. I worked 30 hours a week at a campus bookstore while taking a full course load. I lived in the cheapest dorm, ate ramen most nights, and studied until my eyes burned. Marina lived in a nice apartment off campus, fully furnished. She posted pictures on social media of her friends, her brunches, her perfect college life. Everyone commented about how blessed she was. No one asked how I was doing. I met James during my junior year. He was in my preservation history class. Quiet, thoughtful, kind. He noticed me in a way no one else ever had. He asked about my projects, my ideas, my dreams. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. We dated for 8 months. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Something that belonged to me and only me. Until Thanksgiving break 2014, I brought James home to meet my family. Biggest mistake of my life. Marina was charming. She always was. She asked him about his interests, laughed at his jokes, touched his arm when she talked. I watched it happen in real time and told myself I was being paranoid, jealous, insecure. But I wasn't. 2 weeks later, James broke up with me over text. I think we want different things, he wrote. A month after that, I saw them together at a coffee shop near campus. Marina and James, holding hands. When I confronted her, she cried again. It just happened, Avery. We connected. You can't control who you fall for. I thought you'd be happy for me. Happy. For her. I told my parents. I thought finally they'd see it. They'd see what she'd done. They'd take my side just once. Mom sighed. Avery, you can't own people. If James wanted to be with Marina, that's his choice. You need to be more mature about this. Dad added, she's your sister. You should support her happiness. I stood there shaking. What about my happiness? You're being dramatic, Mom said. You'll find someone else. Marina's sensitive. This is hard for her too. Hard for her. That's when I started to break. My best friend from high school, Liv, noticed first. We were having coffee one afternoon and I told her everything. The clothes, the essay, James, the money, all of it. She put down her cup and stared at me. Avery, you know that's not normal, right? Your family treats you like you're disposable. No, they don't. They just... Marina needs more support. Why? Why does she need more? You work twice as hard. You've never asked them for anything. And they still choose her every single time. Liv leaned forward. When are you going to choose yourself? I didn't have an answer. I tried once more. One last time. It was Christmas 2015. I was 22. I'd been working on a research project about restoring historic theaters in Wisconsin. It was my passion, my pride. I'd spent months on it. I wanted to share it with my family, to show them that I was doing something meaningful too. At dinner, I started talking about it. I got maybe 3 sentences in before Dad interrupted. That's nice, Avery. Hey, Marina, tell everyone about the shelter fundraiser you organized. And just like that, I disappeared. Marina talked for 45 minutes. Everyone listened. Everyone cared. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and cried until my ribs hurt. That night, lying in my childhood bed with the white walls that were never painted blue, I realized something. I'd spent my entire life waiting for them to see me, begging for scraps of affection, proving my worth over and over again. And it was never going to be enough. Because the problem wasn't me. It never was. But I didn't know how to leave, how to let go. They were my family. Marina was my twin, my mirror, my other half. How do you walk away from your own reflection? I didn't know yet, but I was about to find out that sometimes the reflection you see isn't the real you at all. I was 28 when everything shattered. By then, I'd learned to survive. I graduated college with honors and debt. I worked at the Madison Municipal Planning Department, low-level position, processing permit applications. It wasn't my dream, but it paid the bills. Marina worked at a nonprofit, leading community outreach programs. She was featured in a local magazine once titled Madison's Angel of Change. I kept my distance, saw the family for holidays, smiled when expected, existed quietly. Then came the summer of 2022. Our grandfather on Mom's side, who'd immigrated from Norway decades ago, passed away that spring. In his will, he left us property overseas, but to claim it, we needed updated documentation for the citizenship process. Routine, bureaucratic, simple. Mom collected our documents, birth certificates, passports, family records. She submitted everything to the county clerk's office for verification and notarization. I didn't think much of it until the call came. It was a Tuesday afternoon, August 16th. I was at work when Mom phoned, voice tight. "Can you come to the clerk's office? They found something." "What kind of something?" "Just come." I drove there with my heart pounding, not knowing why. When I walked into the municipal building, Mom, Dad, and Marina were already there, sitting across from a clerk named Patricia, middle-aged woman, glasses, looking uncomfortable. "Ms. Hale," Patricia said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Thank you for coming." I sat down, looked at my family. Marina looked pale. Mom was gripping Dad's hand. "What's going on?" Patricia cleared her throat. "We were processing your documents for the citizenship verification, and I noticed an inconsistency." She pulled out 2 birth certificates, ours, placed them side by side on the desk. They looked identical. Same date, same time nearly, same hospital, same parents. "Here's the issue," Patricia continued, pointing at the bottom of Marina's certificate. "This one is missing a signature. The attending physician signed Ms. Marina's initial record, but it was never countersigned by the county registrar. Technically, this document was never fully validated." I stared at the paper. "What does that mean?" "It means," Patricia said carefully, "that according to our records, only one of you was officially registered on the date of birth. The other was added later, but the paperwork trail is incomplete. It's not uncommon with twins, especially if there was confusion during intake." The room felt too small. Marina's voice came out shaky. "Are you saying I wasn't registered?" "I'm saying the documentation is incomplete. Without the second signature, this certificate was never finalized in the system. It's likely an administrative error, but it raises questions about which registration was processed first and which was amended." Mom's face went white. "That's impossible. We registered both girls. We filled out everything." Patricia nodded. "I believe you, but the records we have show only one complete entry from January 1993. The other appears to have been entered retroactively, possibly weeks later." I couldn't breathe. Dad spoke, voice hoarse. "Can you tell which one?" Patricia hesitated. "Not from these documents alone. The digital records from that era are incomplete. We'd need the original hospital intake files, and those are archived off-site. It could take months to retrieve them." Marina started crying, soft, broken sobs, and I sat there, frozen, as a horrible realization crept into my bones. What if I was the one? What if, for the first few days or weeks of our lives, only I had a legal identity? What if Marina, the golden child, the angel, the favorite, had spent her entire existence on a foundation that was never fully real? Or worse, what if it was the opposite? What if I was the afterthought, the one added later, the one who didn't exist on paper until someone remembered? What if my invisibility had been literal from the very start? I don't remember driving home that day. I don't remember walking into my apartment or sitting on the couch. I just remember staring at the wall, feeling like my entire life had been a lie. That night, Marina called me. She was still crying. "Avery, what if I wasn't real? What if they only loved me because I wasn't supposed to be there? What if I've been living a life that was meant for you?" I didn't know what to say. For the first time in our lives, Marina was afraid, truly afraid, because her identity, her perfect image, her role as the cherished daughter, might have been built on a clerical error, and I realized something dark and terrible. Part of me was glad, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because for once, just once, she understood what it felt like to question your entire existence. But that thought made me sick, made me hate myself. I spent the next 2 weeks barely sleeping, barely eating. I'd look in the mirror and wonder, who am I? Am I the original? The copy? The mistake? Mom and Dad tried to explain. They sat us down, voices full of guilt. Dad admitted that the birth had been chaotic. Premature labor, 2 babies, overwhelmed staff. They'd focused on getting us stable, and the paperwork had been rushed. He didn't remember which of us was logged first, didn't remember if there'd been a delay with the second form. "We love you both," Mom said, crying. "It doesn't matter what the paper says." But it did. It mattered so much. Because if Marina's whole identity had been built on being the favored one, and that favor might have stemmed from an administrative accident, what did that make her? And if I'd been invisible because I was literally the one forgotten on paper, what did that make me? I stopped answering their calls, stopped going to family dinners. I couldn't look at them without feeling this crushing weight in my chest. One night, alone in my apartment, I broke down completely, sobbed until my throat was raw, screamed into a pillow until I had no voice left. I felt like I was dying. But somewhere, in the deepest part of that pain, something else stirred. Clarity. I didn't need a piece of paper to tell me who I was. I didn't need my parents' approval. I didn't need Marina's shadow or her spotlight. I needed to stop waiting for someone to validate my existence. I called my old professor from college, Dr. Raymond Ellis. He'd always believed in my work, always encouraged me to pursue historic preservation. I asked if he knew of any opportunities. Anything. He did. Our grandmother, Marjorie, my dad's mother, had passed away 6 months earlier. She'd left me her old house in her will, a beautiful Queen Anne Victorian on the east side of Madison, built in 1898. It had been her art studio once, but it had fallen into disrepair. Dr. Ellis knew about it. He also knew the city was looking for someone to lead a restoration project to turn historic properties into community spaces. "Submit a proposal," he said. "Restore Marjorie's house, turn it into a gallery, show them what you can do." For the first time in my life, I had a path forward that had nothing to do with Marina. I didn't tell anyone. I just started. 14 months. That's how long I disappeared from my family's life. Not dramatically, not with announcements or explanations. I just stopped showing up. Stopped answering most calls, replied to texts with short, polite responses. I told them I was busy with work, which was true. I was rebuilding my grandmother's house, and in the process, rebuilding myself. Marjorie's house was a disaster when I got the keys. Peeling paint, broken windows, floors warped from water damage. The studio she'd used for 40 years was filled with dusty canvases, old brushes, half-finished paintings of Wisconsin landscapes. I hired a structural engineer to assess the damage, drew up plans, applied for the city grant, wrote a proposal to turn the house into a community art gallery, honoring local historic preservation and emerging artists. 3 months after I started, the city approved the project. Small grant, not much, but enough to begin. I worked every evening and weekend, stripped wallpaper, sanded floors, learned how to repair plaster and restore original woodwork. My hands were covered in splinters and paint. My back ached. I'd come home to my apartment covered in dust, exhausted, and fall asleep feeling something I'd never felt before. Purpose. I documented everything, took photos of each phase, wrote about the history of the house, the architecture, the craftsmanship. I posted some of it online, not for validation, but to share what I was learning. People noticed. A local architecture blog featured my project. Then a preservation society reached out, offering advice and connections. I met contractors, artisans, historians, people who cared about the same things I did. People who saw me not as Marina's twin, but as Avery. Just Avery. And that was enough. By month 6, the house was unrecognizable. The exterior was repainted in its original colors, deep green with cream trim. The studio had new windows, refinished floors, and carefully restored moldings. I'd turned the second floor into a gallery space with track lighting and clean white walls. I hung some of Marjorie's old paintings. Then I reached out to local artists and offered them space to showcase their work. Free. Just a place for forgotten art to be seen. The response was overwhelming. Meanwhile, my family kept trying to pull me back in. Mom called every few weeks. Avery, we miss you. When are you coming for dinner? I'm busy with a project. What project? Grandma's house. I'm restoring it. Silence. Then, that old place? Why? Because it matters. Dad texted occasionally. Casual messages. Hope you're doing okay. Thinking of you. Never asking about my life, just checking boxes. I responded politely. Nothing more. Marina tried harder. She called me one night crying. Avery, I can't do this anymore. I feel like I'm falling apart. I don't know who I am. Please talk to me. Part of me wanted to comfort her. Part of me wanted to scream. I took a breath. Marina, I'm sorry you're struggling, but I can't fix this for you. I'm not asking you to fix it. I just need my sister. I've always been here, I said quietly. You just never noticed. She hung up. I heard through family friends that Marina had quit her nonprofit job, that she was seeing a therapist, that she'd stopped posting on social media and deleted most of her photos, that she was, for the first time in her life, facing herself without an audience. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad, and strangely free. By month 10, I'd been promoted at work. The planning department director had seen my restoration project and offered me a role in historic preservation coordination. More responsibility, better pay, respect. I accepted. I also started seeing someone. A guy named Colin, an architect I'd met through the restoration project. He was kind and steady. He asked about my work, my ideas, my dreams. He didn't know Marina, didn't compare us. Didn't even know I was a twin until I told him weeks into dating. His response? That must have been complicated growing up. That's it. No fascination, no comparisons, just acknowledgement. It felt like breathing clean air. By month 12, the gallery was nearly finished. I'd submitted the project for a City Heritage Award. The opening was scheduled for late September 2023. Then the invitation came. Mom called me, voice nervous. Avery, the gallery opening. We'd like to come. All of us, if that's okay. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep this accomplishment mine, untouched by them. But another part of me, the part that had spent a year growing, knew something important. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to them anymore. I was doing it for me. You can come, I said. But this isn't about Marina, or us. It's about Grandma's legacy. Understand? I understand, Mom said quietly. 3 weeks before the opening, Marina reached out. Not by call, by letter. It arrived at my apartment, handwritten on cream-colored paper. Avery, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if I deserve for you to, but I need to say something. I've spent my whole life being the favorite, the angel, the one everyone loved, and I never questioned it. I never wondered what that cost you. I took your sweater, your essay, your boyfriend, your space in our family, and I told myself it was okay because it just happened. But it didn't just happen. I let it happen. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I accepted every gift, every compliment, every bit of attention, and never once thought about what you weren't getting. I'm so sorry. I know that's not enough. But I'm trying to figure out who I am without all of that. And it's terrifying. The opening is in a few weeks. I won't come if you don't want me there. But if you let me, I'd like to. Not as the favorite, not as the angel, just as your sister. If you'll still let me be that. Marina. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it, put it in a drawer, and went back to work. I didn't respond. Not yet. The night before the opening, I stood alone in the gallery. The lights were soft. The paintings glowed. Grandma's landscapes hung beside contemporary pieces by artists no one had heard of yet. I'd given forgotten things a place to matter, including myself. Tomorrow, my family would see what I'd built without them. And I was ready. September 23rd, 2023. The Marjorie Hale Gallery opened at 7 p.m. I wore a navy dress. Simple, professional. I'd cut my hair shorter than Marina's for the first time in our lives. When I looked in the mirror that evening, I saw myself. Not her reflection, not half of something. Whole. The gallery filled quickly. City council members, local artists, Preservation Society board members, press. Dr. Ellis arrived early, beaming with pride. Colin stood beside me, steady and supportive. My parents arrived at 7:15. Dad in a suit, looking older than I remembered. Mom in a floral dress, nervous smile. They walked through the gallery slowly, taking it all in. The restored woodwork, the paintings, the history displays about the house and Grandma's life. Mom stopped in front of one of Grandma's landscapes. A winter scene, bare trees against gray sky. She touched the frame gently. "She painted this the year you were born," Mom whispered. "I remember." I nodded but didn't respond. Dad approached me, hands in his pockets. "Avery, this is incredible." "Really? I had no idea you were doing something this significant." "You didn't ask." He flinched, but he didn't argue. At 7:30, the program was supposed to start. I was scheduled to give a brief speech about the restoration and the gallery's mission. But Marina wasn't there. Part of me was relieved. Part of me felt the old ache. Even now, even after everything, her absence still registered as something missing. Then, at 7:45, the door opened. Marina walked in. She looked different. Hair pulled back simply. Minimal makeup. Wearing jeans and a sweater. Not the polished, perfect version of herself I'd always known. She looked tired, real. Our eyes met across the room. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just gave a small nod, and stayed near the back. At 8, Dr. Ellis introduced me. The crowd quieted. I stepped up to the microphone, hands shaking slightly. "Good evening. Thank you all for being here. My name is Avery Hale, and this is the Marjorie Hale Gallery." I talked about Grandma, her art, her love for this house, the process of restoration, the challenges, the small victories. I talked about preserving history, about giving forgotten things value again. The crowd listened, but I couldn't stop looking at Marina. She was crying, quietly, tears streaming down her face. And then I said something I hadn't planned. This project taught me something important. Things don't need to be perfect to matter. They don't need to be new or shiny or celebrated to have worth. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones people overlook, the ones that get passed by, underestimated, forgotten. I paused. I spent most of my life feeling like one of those things, overlooked, underestimated. But I learned that my value was never determined by who saw me. It was always there. I just had to see it myself. The room was silent. Then Marina stepped forward. She walked through the crowd slowly. People parted. When she reached me, she looked at me with red, puffy eyes. "Can I say something?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then handed her the microphone. Marina's voice shook. "I'm Marina, Avery's twin sister, and for most of our lives, I was the favorite. I won't pretend I wasn't. I got the love, the attention, the support, and I never questioned it. I just accepted it as if I deserved it more." She looked at me. But I didn't. Avery worked harder than me, cared more, sacrificed more, and I let our family ignore her while I soaked up everything she should have had too. Her voice broke. "A year ago, we found out there was a mistake in our birth records. One of us might not have been properly registered, and for the first time, I understood what Avery felt her whole life. That fear of not being real, of not mattering, of being erased." She wiped her eyes. "I don't know if we'll ever find out which certificate was wrong. Maybe it doesn't matter. Because the truth is, I've spent my entire life being loved for an image, and Avery built a life worth loving on her own." She turned back to the crowd. "This gallery, this project, everything you see here, she did it alone, without our family's help, without needing us to tell her she mattered. She just mattered." Then she looked at me again. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope one day I can be the kind of person who does." She handed the microphone back and stepped aside. I stood there, shaking. The crowd was silent. Then I spoke. Voice steady, clear. "Marina, you were right. You were the favorite, but you weren't the problem. The problem was a family that made one of us feel like we had to compete for something that should have been unconditional. I looked at my parents. I love you, but I don't need you to validate me anymore. I spent my whole life waiting for you to see me. And the moment I stopped waiting, I finally saw myself. I looked at Marina. And you're my sister, my twin. We were born 2 minutes apart, and we've spent 30 years living in 2 different worlds. But maybe it's time we try living in the same one, as equals. She nodded, crying harder. I didn't hug her, not yet. But I reached out my hand. She took it. The crowd erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. Because for the first time in our lives, Marina and I were standing together, not as sun and shadow, just as 2 people learning to exist side by side. 4 months later, the gallery won the Madison Heritage Preservation Award. I accepted it with Colin beside me. My parents came, proud but quiet. Marina was in the audience too. She'd started working at a youth mentorship program, teaching kids about self-worth, no cameras, no publicity, just showing up. We had coffee sometimes, short conversations, careful but real. We never did find out whose birth certificate was incomplete. The archived records were too damaged to clarify. And honestly, it stopped mattering. Because I realized something important. I didn't need a document to prove I existed. I existed in the work I did, in the life I built, in the choices I made. Marina learned the same thing, that being loved isn't the same as being whole, and that sometimes you have to lose yourself to find out who you really are. We're not close, not the way people think twins should be. Maybe we never will be, but we're learning. And I'm okay with that, because here's the truth. If you've ever been the invisible one, the forgotten one, the one who didn't matter, listen to me. Your worth was never conditional. It was never dependent on who saw you or chose you or celebrated you. You were always whole. You just had to choose yourself. I did, and my life finally became mine. We were born identical. We were raised as opposites. And in the end, we both learned the same lesson. You don't need anyone's permission to matter. You just need your own. And that's enough. This story, while dramatized, is inspired by the real experiences of countless individuals who have lived in the shadow of a sibling, constantly compared and chronically overlooked. Being genetically identical yet emotionally discarded teaches you something profound. Your worth was never determined by who saw you, but by who you chose to become when no one was looking. These aren't just stories. They are lessons in self-worth, resilience, and the courage to choose yourself when no one else does. Before you go, I want to ask you, have you ever been constantly compared to a sibling or someone close? How did that shape who you are today? And for those who felt invisible in their own families, what was the moment you decided to finally see yourself? If this story resonated with you, if you felt the pain, the struggle, and ultimately the liberation, write the word whole in the comments so I know you stayed until the end. And tell me, what city are you watching from? I'd love to know where this message is reaching. If you found value in this story, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might change how you see yourself. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's still fighting to be seen. And don't forget to click on the next video in the cards above, because every story here carries a message worth hearing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you were never half of anyone. You were always whole.